It's based mainly in the Vancouver Island, the Canada West tour. And that is this little island here that I'm pointing out that looks about the size of the Isle of Man on a map. So right down at the bottom of Canada. It looks really, really small. But it's actually half the land area of the British Isles, but it only has 1% of the population. So it's a very wild and remote place, really. So we land in Vancouver City. We spend a little time pottering around, but then we catch the ferry and go over to Vancouver Island itself. And on the ferry trip, it's brilliant because the Great Fraser River is bringing glacial meltwater down, and that forms this great big plume of input into the sea, and that meets the clear blue water of the Pacific, and you actually cross from brown to blue water. And where this interface happens, it just seems to be incredibly productive, and it's full of different birds to see, things like surf scoters and the American white-winged scoter, which is their equivalent of our velvet scoter, and various dolphins as well. This is the Pacific white-sided dolphin, and you often see whales. That's just one minke whale, but I've seen humpbacks and orcas and various things actually from the trip going over to Vancouver Island. And when we arrive after about an hour's drive, it's lunchtime and everybody wants to stop. And we stop at a place called Little Qualicum Falls, which is a very spectacular river ravine, but it's also temperate rainforest, our first taste of proper temperate rainforest. And it's a chance to see some of the birds that we don't, and animals that we don't, that inhabit these areas that we don't see in Britain. Things like the American dipper, that's common on most of the rivers up there, but you usually see that, and red-breasted nuthatches with their little toy trumpet calls calling in the trees nearby. And this is the red squirrel. I've added American red squirrel because they call it exactly the same as our red squirrel, but it's only half the size of ours, and it's holding a Douglas fir cone. And the reason why I'm confident that that is a Douglas fir is because it has those unique seeds that look like mice have shot into the in between the lobes of the cone, and you can just see the tail and the back legs hanging out of it. So that's how I know that's the Douglas fir. There's also a very closely related squirrel that feeds on Douglas fir cones. It's called the Douglas squirrel, but this one is actually the red squirrel. Very, very similar. They just call these dark-eyed juncos, but I first learned these as Oregon juncos because they don't look like the slate-coloured juncos that are grey all over, but they've got a huge amount of flash in the white. And junco's actually a Spanish name for juncus, which is the rushes, and it was a Spanish word for reed buntings. And when the Spaniards first went over there, junco, they called them as if they were reed buntings, and the name stuck. And so this family of birds are now known as juncos, but it's a very common bird over in most of North America. Once you leave the mainland, when you get over to Vancouver Island, this becomes the common chickadee, which is the chestnut-backed chickadee, which is actually quite a difficult bird to see on mainland. It's much rarer, but it's a common and easy bird to see, and it's all over the coniferous rainforest there. And waxwings are common too, as well. Not the Bohemian waxwing that we get in Europe, although they do occur over there, but the cedar waxwings, they've got pale undertail and a slightly different wing and face markings as well, and a little bit smaller as well, but very common bird. And they have two kinglets, one that's our equivalent of the goldcrest, which is this one, the ruby crown kinglet, and the other one is like a firecrest with a stripe through its eye, which is the golden crown. And we usually see both of them in reasonable numbers. Then we continue over towards the west coast, and then we enter the tsunami hazard zone, which is always a bit disconcerting for people from Britain that are not used to seeing warnings like this. But the San Andreas Fault that divides the American and the Pacific plate continues right the way up the west coast. So when earthquakes and tremors occur, there is a risk of a tsunami, although I've never witnessed one when I've been over there. But this is the the west coast. You can see on Vancouver Island there are some huge mountains that you have to cross to get over to the west coast, and we also pass some primary rainforest on the way. Primary forest is forest that has never been logged, and some of these trees are about 800 or 900 years old, and that's a photograph of a younger me standing in the middle of one of the cavities in the one of these rainforest giants looking up. Now, when you get over to the west coast, this is secondary rainforest that has been logged and has grown back. It's absolutely impenetrable because it's just full of roots and brash and stuff. You know, it would take you hours just to travel a kilometre through there. So what the Canadians have kindly done is they've built lovely little paths and routes through the rainforest that enable you to reach the coast, and they're very, very popular. However, bears also find the travelling through rainforest quite cumbersome, and you can see all the different vegetation there. It's not easy for them either. So the bears actually like travelling on these paths as well, and so it is one of the best places to see your first black bears is just walking down these paths here. And there are various warnings about wolves and cougars in the area, although your chances of seeing those are quite slim, but it's quite exciting seeing the warnings everywhere. This is instead of having the gravel paths, when you're going up and down, they often have these little wooden walkways, and again the bears love these as well. These ones came wandering past and we just stood aside and let them pass us, and this big female here just brushed past my leg and just carried on nonchalantly as if nothing had happened. It's really quite interesting, but and you do get some very, very close views of black and grizzly bears on this trip, but I'll tell you about those a little bit later. And all the time you can hear the chattering of Steller's jays, a very common bird in the forests over on that side of Vancouver Island. You'll be seeing loads of these beautiful birds. And when you reach the coast, this is what it looks like. It's that's you carry on over the Pacific there, and the next stop is sort of Japan and Russia. It's you know, there's absolutely nothing for thousands of miles. So there's and you've got these hard volcanic rocky shores here, and you get rocky shore birds that you find on there. So black oyster catchers are a common species. They feed on the mussels on the rocks. So they're not like our oyster catchers that feed in fields and on sandy bays. They're definitely a rocky shore species, the black American black oyster catcher. And I mentioned it earlier, but wandering tattlers as well. That's another rocky coast species, usually in fairly small numbers, but again, if we're lucky, we can find them. And this is two more rocky coast species, although I did take these on a little jetty. This is a surf bird on the left and a black turnstone. The next place that we stop is a wonderful little place called Ucluelet, and it has a marina here. We stay here for a couple of nights because we make various excursions from here. And the thing that that most people enjoy about this trip is that every day there is an opportunity to see some magnificent megafauna, and so we take boat trips out to see these. This is I took this photograph of a bald eagle just on one of the posts in the marina, exactly where you were looking there. And again, bald eagles are just everywhere there and very, very approachable. You get some magnificent views of them. So also on the if you go on to the beaches there, you get some sandy shore birds and gulls. This is a semi-palmated sandpiper being chased by a sanderling. And you know how small sanderlings are, and you can see that those things, they're only about the size of a little stint, half the size. But this is a group of western sandpipers that are just on the rocks, just where I've shown you there. Another animal that's fairly common there, I see them every trip, are the river otters. They used to think that these were an American subspecies of the British otter, the European otter, but when they've looked at the DNA, they found that they're not even closely related. So this used to be subspecies canadensis of Lutra lutra, and they had to erect a whole new genus for them. So now they just invented the name Lontra because it was fairly similar to Lutra and it wasn't too confusing. So now it's Lontra canadensis. So even though they look to you and me like our otters, maybe a little bit bigger, they're actually not even closely related. We go out to, we have 2 trips. We have one inland to all the little inland creeks and bays. And we often go on this, I'm not even what sure you call this. It's an inflatable motorboat that can take people, and they can roll up the sides and you can get good close views of wildlife. And we head out looking for things. And we often see large numbers of harbour porpoise here. Harbour porpoise, despite being one of the commonest cetaceans that you see most often, it's the most difficult to photograph because without warning, it just appears for a split second and then they're gone again. And you never know where they're going to appear. So it's a bit like a shooting range, whack-a-mole or something like that, where you see one come up and then point the camera and try and get a picture of it. But on last year's trip, I managed to get 2 together just coming up to harbour porpoise. These are harbour seals, or common seals as we call them, but they're a different subspecies. They've got a different blotchy pelage, as you can see there. That doesn't really look like a British one here. But the main reason we go on this boat trip is because at low tide, the bears come out of the woods for a bit of shellfish. They like to turn over the stones here and get at the crabs and the mussels and anything else that they find here, and they really enjoy feeding them. But and they're so used to the boats, they're not bothered, and you can get very, very close to them. Look, that was a male that was a little bit disgruntled that we got rather close, but giving us a hard stare, a bit like Paddington does, isn't it? But you know, you do get fantastic views of the black bears here on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And also, if we're very lucky, we sometimes see wolves. There's packs of the coastal wolves there, but they're very elusive, you know, just if we're lucky sometimes. But on this instance, we saw one there, and then we managed to see another group here. These were taken very early morning before I had a decent camera and when things were a bit grainy, but you can see they're just playing around like Alsatian dogs on the shore here. So then when we've done the inland part, we then go out into the open ocean. And here we're in search of larger whales. We usually see things like western greaves on the way out and rhinoceros auklets. This one's in winter plumage, but it still has the little rhino horn on the top of its bill. And here we're looking for things like grey whales. Now, I mentioned those in my last talk, and here we catch them on migration, moving back down south again on their way to Baja California, having spent the summer in Alaska. But it's great to see that's a grey whale blowing against these rocky islands that are so characteristic of the west coast of Vancouver Island. And there's a fluking one. You can see the characteristic white blotches all over there as the water pours off. I was trying to hang back a little bit rather than get a close up, so you can actually see the setting of the hills and what the habitat's like. And this is a sharp whale blow right next to us. This is another species of whale we usually see out there, which is the humpback whale. And that's one showing you how it gets its name. But again, with the characteristic backdrop that is, you know, that you see all over Western Canada there. Then when we finished at Ucluelet and Tofino, that's on the west coast, we have to come back to the east coast to drive north on the arterial road that runs north to south in Vancouver Island, because there isn't one that runs up the west coast. It's too indented with fjords. And then we head to a place called Zabalos, which is very remote. It's you have to travel 42 kilometers down logging tracks like this over the mountains to reach the little remote place of Zabalos. But there's plenty of wildlife to see on that because it is off-piste. You're seeing things like this is a Roosevelt elk that we often see down there. And there's also several lakes where there's a good chance of seeing beaver, although we sometimes have to come out in the evening to try and look for these because they're often an evening and morning creature. Huge great things as well. But I was just stood out in the open when I took this one on the last trip there. And this is what Zabalos looks like. Just look how steep those hills are and how remote it is. It's like a little Wild West town, and the best access to it is from the sea. When I was there last time, there was a pileated woodpecker just down from the place where we were staying, and this male was hammering away at the trees there. So now Zeballos is also apparently has the highest density of cougars in the whole of North America. And though they are very, very elusive, and there's signs up all over the place, and the landlady at the place where we stay tells us all sorts of tales about seeing cougars and all the rest of it, but they are very, very elusive. And so we usually go out on the boat trip with a chap called Dan, who has a great little boat, and it's the real pioneering stuff there. It's so off the beaten track that you don't tend to bump into any other boats or anybody else out there. You go out there looking for wildlife, and the wildlife is all yours. And one of this is a fabulous bird. I just love it. This is the marbled murrelet, and it was the last bird in North America to have its nest discovered. And it wasn't discovered until the mid-1970s. And then the Audubon Society put out a reward for anybody who could document a nest of this species. And it was finally found the nest was about 300 feet up a conifer tree in primary rainforest, and the nest was on a mossy branch, and this is where they nest. But they go and feed on the fjords and then come back to the land, sometimes up to 50 miles, and that's where they travel. So no wonder it took them so long to find it. But it's always a great bird to see when we see marbled murrelets. And one morning we set out on this was the very morning I'm going to tell you about, and there was mist lying in there. And you often see things in the water. They can be otters, sea otters, deer. There's even heard, wolves swimming in the water, but, seals, sea lions. There's lots of things that can be in water. So seeing a head swimming in the water some distance ahead wasn't that unusual. But when I looked through my binoculars, I noticed that the head was cat-shaped. And I realized what it was, and I screamed at our boatman, please put your foot down, get forward as quickly as possible. And he did just that, and we sped forwards, and there indeed was a cougar swimming in the water. And we watched it, and it just climbed out there, and it didn't shake like a dog. It just let all the water drip off it, and then it bounded off into the rainforest, never to be seen again. And we wondered what it had been doing swimming, and we realized there was a colony of harbour seals just on a little island that it had swum from. So it was obviously very hungry and was trying to get at the seals there. But it's black-tailed deer, which they really like to feed on. But that one was obviously having difficulty finding a black-tailed deer, so it had gone for the seals. This was also taken at Zeballos, and for wildlife photographers out there, you'll know that this is like the holy grail of a whale shot: is to get the blow backlit, but against a dark background, so it really stands out. And this is a humpback whale just doing look how tall that blow is. Absolutely magnificent. And there's glaucous-winged gulls flying around there as well. And this is another, the classic shot, but this was taken again at Zeballos, because we're in a tiny little boat. You can do there's nobody around, there's no rules or anything. And we just sort of get into a good position. And there indeed is the whale doing a dive and all the water pouring off the top. It just is such a magical experience. Everybody loves Zeballos when they go there. And once this was taken at Zeballos again, and all the fish started leaping in a very tight ball, and the boatman said, "Keep your eye on that, because I think something exciting is going to happen." And a few seconds later, this humpback whale just came up and just gulped the whole lot down right in front of us. It was so exciting there. The other reason why we go to Zeballos is because it's got the highest density of sea otters. This is a big male with a big blonde head, and a really chunky male there. He almost looks like a little grizzly bear lying back in the water there. But the females are a bit smaller and neater, and they also have this endearing habit of keeping the babies on their bellies, on their chests, for a huge amount of time. The babies can be nearly as big as the adults, and yet they still like to ride around on mum's tum there. So a brilliant thing. And they also do endearing things like give you a round of applause. Look at that. It's so theatrical, isn't it, there? But you see plenty of sea otters on this trip. Then when we finished at Zeballos, we head over to the other coast. This is the east coast of Vancouver Island, and this is to visit Telegraph Cove, which is a very famous place because, all the salmon in the Pacific come and gather in this area, and they wait for the autumn rains before they can migrate up the rivers to spawn. But all of the, there's 5 species of salmon. There's one of the salmon. The 5 species, there you go, Chinook, chum, coho, pink, and sockeye. You probably recognize those from tins of salmon. And when they enter, go from freshwater to, seawater to freshwater, they completely change. There's a chum salmon. You can see it looks like our salmon in Britain at the bottom. But when you look, the females and the males just develop this completely different skin color and patterns. And the males develop these huge, great teeth and things there. But anyway, you get huge concentrations of salmon in the bays here, waiting to head up, and everything just arrives there to feed on it, including orcas. And that's the main reason we go here, because it's one of the best places on the planet to get close and personal with orcas. There's a group of people on a different boat watching them, but I look at this. This was a single pod that I took, and every single animal in this pod will be a blood relative, and they meet with pods of other orcas that they get on well with, and the males will mate with females from either side, but then they all go back to their own pod. So as I said, you know, the wives don't stay with their husbands or anything. Once they've mated, that's it. They go back to their family group and stay with them. And yeah, so they're all blood relatives, and you can get some really great views. This is a mother and youngster orca here that I took at Telegraph Cove, and even a leaping orca, a bit of a distant one, but never mind, it's still a leaping orca. And you see other things here as well. This is another Pacific white-sided dolphin that we often see around Telegraph Cove. And these are Dahl's porpoises, tiny little porpoises that belt through the surface of the water. And they're like mini orcas as well. They have white sides. You can just see it particularly on the back one there. But again, always an exciting animal to see, cetacean to see. And some of the seabirds are quite good. These are ancient murrelets. They're called ancient because of those white hairs on the head. It reminds them of the sort of distinguished grey of an aging person. So that's the name. And it's even its Latin name, antiquus, means old, for the same reason. Redneck phalaropes, again, very common here. You see flocks of them belting all over the place. This was on the surface of the sea here. Forktail storm petrels, another one that we usually see. You don't often get views quite as good as this, but still, yeah, I did take that in Telegraph Cove. And Sabine's gulls as well. They're usually a scarce gull, but I saw a couple on the last trip, and you know, it's quite an expected bird to see in that area. And there's huge numbers of humpback whales there as well, all feeding on the large fish that the salmon are feeding on as well, the smaller fish that the salmon are feeding on. And whenever a whale's feeding, because the little fish jump out of into the sky, all the gulls gather to feed, and you can always tell when there's a whale feeding there. But look at how close this is. You can see the baleen plates there, and all the hair-like baleen on the inside of the mouth there that traps all the fish and plankton that they're feeding on. And look at that. That's like a macro shot of the close-up of the bottom part of a whale's mouth. You can see it still remains watertight, even when all those throat grooves expand. It's like the inside of a beach ball, that is. We also get, there's several colonies. This is a declining animal, but it's Steller's sea lion. And you can see there's a hole out there, and it's bigger than a California sea lion, and much blonder, and yeah, a different shaped face, but it is a sea lion nonetheless. But that's quite a scarce one there. And also in this Telegraph Cove area, we often see raccoons feeding on the beach at dusk and dawn, and we can go out and photograph those. And when I say dusk and dawn, it's if you can get them in the sunrise, you can get interesting photos like that of interaction between them with the nice pastel colours of sunrise. Just up the coast from Telegraph Coast, there's a place that we often called the Cluxewe Estuary. And here, it's just phenomenal for bird photography. I mean, the bald eagles just sort of sit around feeding on fish on the beach there, and there's great northern divers sort of flapping and feeding just offshore, and surf scoters at ridiculously close range, and harlequin ducks as well. This was taken in autumn, and there were still at least, several of them in full breeding plumage. That one's like a first-year male, but look at the one in the background. I think one of the most beautiful ducks on the planet. Then when we finished at the Telegraph Cove area, we have to head to the top of the island, Port Hardy, where we catch a float plane and we fly about 40 miles north of Vancouver Island to a place called, to Great Bear Lodge on the Smith Inlet. We sail over lots of remote logging areas until we arrive at on the float plane, and we disembark on the jetty here at Great Bear Lodge. And it is an extraordinarily beautiful and quiet place. You don't see any other people there. The wildlife is just incredibly confiding. I took this, just above the boat at Great Bear Lodge, and there's, but it's not unusual to be able to get photographs like this. Belted kingfishers as well, they're common up there, and not just there. If the weather's decent, we'll get things like Camberwell beauties, or morning cloaks as they call them over there, and other butterflies as well, but I just put this one in as an example. And we go in small groups in the boats and can explore the estuary and look for wildlife, but the main highlight is to actually look for bears. If you look carefully, I don't know if you've still got if you can see the full screen here, but on that left-hand tree that is absolutely dripping with beard lichens, there's several bald eagles just sat in the top there, and then on the ground there's 3 grizzly bears, and that just really captures the spirit of Great Bear Lodge for me. But what people really like to do is go up the river and go into the bear watching hides, and in places where the salmon come to spawn, and then you can get quite large groups of grizzly bears coming to feed, and they feed right in front of you. And again, the photo opportunities here are just tremendous. That's a grizzly bear bouncing through the water, chasing this salmon through the shallows there, and that's a grizzly bear having just caught a huge chump salmon, and it's just about to go and dispatch that. There's a mother bear with the baby. I just love the little sideways glance that baby is giving you, showing you the whites of its eyes as it looks over its shoulder. But yeah, and then there's a huge great male. Often it's mainly females and youngsters that we see hunting, but sometimes big males come in as well, and this is a big bruiser of a male. You can see he's even lost the upright nature of his ear because he's been in a fight at some point, but there he is going across the river there. And that's usually the last place we stand. We do go over and then do a little bit of bird watching on the mainland before we leave, but that's the main part of the trip, and most of the things that you would be seeing on the Spirit Bear cruise. It's traditional to end on a sunset, and I'm the last speaker of the evening, so there's a Vancouver Island sunset taken at Cluxewy. Thank you very much.